Well, here we are back with part 2 of Can I Refret My Own Guitar. Where we are at the moment, we've got all the frets in, but they're only crudely cut to length. They need to be filed at the ends, they need to be levelled, and then they need dressing. I need to replace the nut on the guitar and then assemble it and set it up. So without further ado, let's head to the shed of rust. The neck's been left overnight, not particularly for any reason that I felt it needed overnight to dry. It won't have done it any harm, of course, but it was just the way the day went. I'd run out of time, so it sat overnight, so the frets should be as well seated and as glued down as they're going to be. I think the glue only really aids it because it's the tangs on the frets, the barbed tangs, that are really doing the job of holding the frets in, and not all guitars glue the frets down. A lot of guitars do now, but not all of them. So anyway, so the next job I'm going to do is I'm going to address the sides of them, get them nice and smooth before I think about levelling it. Whether that's the right way to go, but they're obviously quite sharp, these fret ends, so they do make it unpleasant to hold. So if I get those cut back flush and filed down now, that should make life a little bit simpler. So the first thing I'm going to do is going to cut them with either the end cutters or a pair of side cutters. Not sure if these are man enough to cut them without damaging them. So I'll see, and then I'll just get them flusher to the neck. Now that's a bit of a strain for those, so I shall leave those. I don't want to damage them, but I know this is capable of doing it. So I'll just go down the edge of the neck and get them as flush as I can before I start filing them. So the next thing I'm going to do is take a fairly coarse file, with, I suppose it'll be a first cut file with no handle on it, and the reason for that is it means I can get it up the side of the neck without the handle holding it away from the edge of the fretboard. So I'm just going to run that up and down gently, taking the tops of the frets back just so that I can start getting it nearer the edge of the fingerboard. And what I've seen on a video is an ideal thing is to have the frets slightly more upright towards the heel of the neck and then taper more up near the nut. I would assume that's because at the nut, from there to the first few frets, there's very little movement in terms of string vibration and string bending, whereas down here you're more likely to be bending strings more, so there's a danger that they could come off the edge of the fingerboard, so it gives you as much meat as possible. That's the theory anyway. So what I'll do with the file, I'll just rub a little bit of chalk in it, because chalk, whilst it's a bit messy, it does help prevent files clogging up, and any chalk on the neck afterwards will blow up anyway with a bit of air. What I have found, and I'm learning all the time obviously, is it's slightly easier now. I've got a little bench vise here, 2 scrap pieces of wood, and that's just, it's held firm, it's not tight at all, and it just means the neck's a bit more secure for me to just run the file gently down the fret ends to start taking them back. And it's always with these jobs, you just got to take your time and you can't rush it. You've got to sort of almost zone out and meditate as you're doing it. I always think that, you know, get the radio on your favourite station, in my case Planet Rock, and just chill out and enjoy the music while you're doing something that's fairly monotonous. And then because we all know if you start to rush it because you're getting a bit bored and you want to get to the end of it, that's when you make a mistake. So just take your time and zone out. So that's what I'm going to do now. Now I've got it a bit better secured, I shall put my radio on and I shall just carry on getting those a bit more flush to the edge of the fretboard. Neck flipped over and gently stroke firmly clamped between the scrap, and now I'm just repeating the same process. So it's harder initially. All the fret ends are different heights, none of them are the same. At least once you start going, you level them. Even if they're not right, you've leveled them down so they're fairly level enough that the file will ride along the top of them like that. Well, I've now finished the other side and that's fairly smooth. It's obviously nowhere near play ready yet, but I'll just up and down gently. So now what I'm going to do is go from the coarser file to a finer flat file. So what I'll do, I'm going to knock the handle off. Now normally it's not recommended you use a file like this without a handle on, because the tag, if that catches, that could easily go in your hand, or even worse, into your wrist possibly, and into a vein. So good practice is you shouldn't use files like this, but the reason I'm using it like that is because I was holding it there anyway, so the tag's well out of the way, and it's not like I'm doing anything heavy, so there's no risk of this being forced. I'm just gently running it up and down. So what I'm going to do is knock the handle off of this one, so then it'll sit flusher to the neck, while I'm trying to just get them a little bit more finessed. So that comes off easily there. So what I might do is just apply a little bit of chalk, as I mentioned before, which helps prevent the file from clogging. Knock the excess off, and then just gently up and down. Now you can hear, I think, that that's a finer cut. It's not as aggressive as the first file I was using. Just repeating the same process on the other side of the neck. So now that's both sides of the neck brought flush. They're not rounded off nicely yet or anything, but the neck is now brought down. So the frets are all brought down, so they're pretty well flush with the edge of the fingerboard. So I think the next thing I'll do is start to just shape the ends of the frets a bit, just round them over slightly to make them more presentable for playing before I level the frets. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to just put some masking tape down the edges of the frets, as I did when I set up the vintage guitar. And the masking tape I like is this one. It's a decorator's tape, and it seems to come off nicely without damaging any of the varnish or anything on the fingerboard or anything on the back of the neck. And it'll just help protect the edges of the fingerboard from filing and that, and also any metal filings won't get into the wood. They'll be on the tape, which will come away. So all I'm going to do basically, take the roller tape and just up as tight as I can to the frets and go all the way down the neck. So I'll do that just to make sure that the the rosewoods protected as much as possible for any next operations I do. Now I've covered all the fretboard in masking tape, and what I did was, as the frets get narrow, I just gently cut the masking tape narrow with a sharp knife, so that the fingerboard's now protected while I just file the fret ends. So for that I'm going to use this little file that I showed you earlier with the safe edges on. So it's just a case of going round and rounding them off. Again, at this stage I'm not aiming for the fully polished edge, it's just to make them nice and smooth, and then I'll polish them up with finer grits of paper later on. I've moved the camera in a bit closer so hopefully you can get a little look at what I'm doing. So that one I've rounded over slightly, so just gone round like that, just to round the edge off to make it smooth. Now that one's sharp because it's got a fairly sharp edge on it where it's been filed, so and any filing marks, so now that's smooth to the touch, will be taken out with various grades of wet and dry paper I use. So as you can see from the file, look, that edge is shiny, there's no abrasion at all on the edges, they're safe edges, nice and smooth. So I might not needed to have masked the neck up, but as an amateur I'd rather be safe than sorry. If I'd done a few of these, you know, I might have a different approach, but and that's all it seems to need, is just a gentle round over. So I've now, I don't know if you can see that, been down the edge of all the frets with the fret file just to start to round them off, and the same over here. And then the next job is to level the frets, because you might find that they're slightly higher in places. So I'm going to mark the top of them with a marker pen so that they've, see if that works, get some, so that I can see where the sanding paper is touching and where it's missing. So the idea is you want to sand it down gently till they're all level, so that it's taking off the black ink off of every fret. Whether that shows up on camera, but I've now marked all the tops of the frets with like a Sharpie pen, so I'll be able to see where the sanding's working, where it's actually touching the frets and where it's missing them, till they're all getting touched and leveled. So the next thing now is for me to take my leveling beam, which has got 320 sandpaper stuck on it, and gently run it across the frets to make sure they're all level. Now I don't know if you can see that, but you can see spots where the ink hasn't been removed, so it shows that there's a little bit of leveling to do. Now that looks, now that all the frets are level because all the black pen has gone off of them, what I'll do, I'll just, for my own peace of mind, put a little bit more black pen on them and then just run the sanding beam down there one more time to make sure it all comes off uniformly. So I've remarked all the frets for my own peace of mind, and I'm just now going to go up and down them. And I think you can see now that the black's been taken off uniformly. So now I've got level frets, but they're flat topped. They need a recrowning so that they're nice to play on. So at the moment they're rough and they're flat where they've been leveled. So the next stage is to recrown them. So I think the thing is I'll mark them up again so then I can see how the crowning's going, to make sure that I'm not taking too much off when I actually start the crowning process. It's quite hard to see, but what I've done, I've marked all the frets with black pen again, and now using my fret crowning file, I think with these particular frets I'm going to probably go with the narrowest, I don't know if you can see that, is that in shot, the narrowest concave there is. And all I'm trying to do now is, where the top is flat, the top is the right height, but it's almost the sides that need bringing in so that you get a nice crown on top of the fret again. So hopefully you can see that. That's a thick black line where the pen's been across the top of the fret. So that shows we've got the leveled fret, but it's now got a flat point on it. So I'm going to take my file and just put it on it and then rub it backward and forth, trying to keep to the radius of the fingerboard. And all I'm doing is, if you can see that, hopefully you can, it's thinning the black line, so the top of the fret isn't actually getting touched by what I'm doing. The top of the fret remains the same height, but it's just the sides are being brought in. So then that's now taking it to a thinner black line, meaning you're going to have a more accurate point where the string's going to be taking off the top of the fret. Now I've been down all the frets now and recrowned them, but obviously they're quite rough. So, and I've also, just for my own peace of mind, I went down the neck with a fret rocker just to make sure that there was nothing untoward going on, and there's no fret rocking going on. They all seem to be nice and level. So now, as far as I'm concerned, they're crowned again. They've got a dome on them. They're level, and they just need now polishing up, finishing up, so that they can be played on. And the way I'm going to do that is, as I did with the vintage guitar, is get some various grades of sandpaper and start working my way down to start polishing them up. So to start off with, I've got some 400 grit paper, and I'm going to just start to smooth them up with that. I've been down all the frets with 400, so now I've moved on to 600, so I'm doing it slowly to try and just gradually work all the score marks out from where the frets have been levelled. And as I'm doing it, I'm making sure that the ends of the frets come in for a little bit of a sanding, so that it just helps smooth those off even more. Well, having gone over all the frets now with 600 grit, I'm now going to go over them with 800 grit wet and dry paper. So as I say, gradually taking out any of the filing marks to get nice smooth shiny frets, and obviously working the ends of the frets as I do it, just to make sure they're now nicely rounded over. Working round the ends there just to make sure that they're nice and rounded over, so that there's nothing sharp there to make them pleasant to play on. Now, having gone over the whole neck with 800, I've moved up to I think this is 1500, so again a lot finer. And every time just trying to get the scratches out from the previous paper, just to leave it a nice sort of even dull finish. I mean, that's feeling pretty smooth to the touch, so that's a good sign, because effectively that's what's going to be happening when you're playing the guitar. You're going to be sliding the strings over the frets, so you want them nice and smooth to the touch. Now, having gone over the neck with 1500 grit, I've now moved up to the last one, which is 2500 grit. So I'm going to go up, repeating exactly what I've done before, just going over the frets. Obviously this is pretty fine stuff now, and just trying to make sure that they're as smooth as I can get them. Well, the last stage I'm going to do on the actual fret dressing is give them a polish with some metal polish, which is obviously a very fine abrasive. Something I did when I did the fret leveling on the vintage guitar. This is like a white paste look, so I'm going to put some of that on and give it a bit of a buff up. This is meant to just give it that final kind of shine that you want to see on the frets of your guitar, to really make them pleasant to play on. So hopefully you can see that. See the difference between fret 1 and fret 2. So I shall work my way down the neck and just give them a final little polish up. I have to say I'm quite pleased with the results so far. What it'd be like when I get it all apart and actually try and put the guitar back together, I don't know. Looks good so far. Well, that's the frets all polished up, and hopefully you can see now that there's a bit of a shine on them. So that should make for a nice plain stroke string bending surface. I've taken all the masking tape off the fingerboard now. One job I've got to do is take out the nut to replace it with the Tusk low friction nut I've bought. So the first thing I'm going to do, I'm going to try to pull it out gently, and if I can't, or it looks like it's glued in there tight, I'm going to saw it in half, then break it in on itself. So what I'll do, the first thing I'll do is take a scalpel and just gently go up against the nut and the fingerboard, just to break any bond there, so that there's less risk of anything tearing out, and then go down the sides just along the bottom. The same here, just to give it the best chance. I'm not going to try very hard at this. If I can pull it out without having to saw it, that's great. That's a real bonus. So what I thought I'd try is those, because they'll grab onto it and I can just try and lift it. It did feel like that moved. Oh, that's come. Result. That's good. Looking like that, there had been some glue in there at some point. So that's the old nut out. And what I'll do, I'll just gently clean that nut slot up with a little bit of sandpaper, and I'll see how the new one fits. Actually, what might be sensible is, before I do anything, to get the new one and just try it in the slot. So there's my new nut blank, and I'll just see if that fits. It's a whisker wide. I'm assuming that little tag there needs to come off. That doesn't look right to me. It's got a straight edge. Yeah, that tag's definitely shouldn't be on there. That's like a moulding mark. Better. Might just want thinning down a whisker to fit. Let's see. First thing then, I'll clean out the nut slot as best I can. the new nut is very slightly too wide. It might go in with a bit of a force, but I don't really want to push it in that hard. It might go, but what I might do is just give it a couple of strokes. This is a piece of 320 wet and dry that's stuck down on a flat piece of board, so I'm just going to gently rub that a little bit, just to try and make it a bit of fit in there, because whilst I want it firm, I don't want to risk tapping it in and damaging anything. Very nearly in there. A couple more strokes, I think. What I've noticed looking at the old nut is that it isn't, I don't know if you can see that, dead flat on the base. And if I put a straight edge in the nut slot, it rocks. It doesn't sit straight flat on it like it does there. So that the nut I've bought is designed for either flat slots or slightly concave. So what I think I'll do is just file a little bit of that centre lug off, just to start to give it a concave, so it might actually sit in there a little bit better without using any force. So I need my file. I just want to start got a slightly coarser file here. Well, I think that will do now as a start point for that. So I've got one job left I want to try and do, is I've got one or two little chips further down here from where I got the frets out, and I want to try if I can to get some dust from sawdust and super glue it in, do the super glue and sawdust trick on it. If that's possible, I'll see. There's just one or two little nicks there where some breakout from the frets coming out. Now to get the sawdust, what I've got is a bit of, I'm just sanding the underside of the fretboard out of sight, just very lightly, more just to get some dust that I can then mix with some super glue to try and fill one or two of the little divots in the neck. Then I know the wood colour will match exactly the wood of the neck, so just get that. Now I've got to carefully put that somewhere. So right, what I'm going to do is take a little bit of sawdust, drop it into where the divot is gently, which is there. And then try and drop a little bit of super glue in it. I've got a tiny little bit of super glue. go one more there. See if I can get that better. Just clean that up. Let's put a bit of dust in there. That'll be easier. Super glue still soft. Well, looking where I've filled those, they're not looking too bad, and I think that's enough, to be honest, for what I'm doing. So I think what I'll do now is get some lemon oil and just oil the fingerboard up prior to putting it back on the guitar. As I mentioned, I'll get a clean piece of rag and I'll just give the fingerboard a little bit of lemon oil. Actually, that rag's clean there. Well, there's the neck all oiled up, so hopefully you can see that, I think that looks okay, really, considering once it gets the strings on it and that, it shouldn't look too bad. All I've got to do now is see whether it actually plays all right and whether I've done it or whether I've cured or killed, as it were. So let's get the neck back onto the guitar and put some strings on it and see how we get on. Well, here we go, it's all back together now and restrung. I haven't cut the strings off yet, just in case they have to come off for a little bit of setting up once it's settled down a little bit. I've tightened up the truss rod and, to be honest, had to do very little setting up. I was surprised. The string height and intonation were about there from as it was set previously, which was surprising considering the neck's got taller frets on it now than it did have. And I was lucky with the nut. The nut, as you saw from the video, was a fairly straightforward swap over. I just had to sand it slightly thinner, just a few strokes on my wet and dry paper glued down to a flat piece of board, and adjust the height very slightly. I was lucky in this particular case, it was fairly painless. The nut was a little bit wide, so once fitted I had to sand the ends down just to make them flush with the edge of the fingerboard. But no, that was good. I was expecting more of a fight with the nut than I actually got. Sometimes the way things you think are going to be tricky aren't, and things you think are going to be easy usually aren't and turn out to be a bit of a struggle. Would I have done anything different? A couple of things. I probably would have sanded the fingerboard completely using a block with sandpaper glued to it, which I've got in the shed and didn't actually use because I didn't want to disturb any wear on the neck really. I wanted to keep the neck as is. I mean, it hasn't affected it now, it's all back together, but it's possibly something I would have done as practice. The other thing I was concerned about in doing that is I might scratch the plastic position markers with the sanding paper, and then they might not come out, the marks, even going through the finer grits. I don't know, that's just something that I myself don't know because of lack of experience, but that was one of the reasons I didn't. The frets have all seated nicely and they're all levelled off nicely. It all plays and there's no buzzing, which is great, so I'm pleased about that. It's funny, it feels like a new guitar now, and that wants a few songs bashed into it, if you know what I mean. That feeling when you get them, and whilst they're set up and they're nice, they just don't quite feel like yours. One thing I'll be honest about, the fret ends, some of them are still a whisker sharp. It's really funny because sanding fret ends is something I've done numerous times on guitars over the years, where you've had them and the neck shrinks as it becomes into a centrally heated environment and the frets just protrude slightly. And when I was in the shed checking it, it felt absolutely fine. But I think possibly through inexperience, what's happened is where I was checking it possibly like this, you've got a different grip on the guitar when you're playing it, and possibly bits towards the back of the fret maybe are still slightly sharp. So that's something I will just dress and tidy up slightly. It's not bad, but it's just not as good as I want it to be. Well, it all plays nicely and it's all in tune. There's no fret buzzes, which is good. And the strings bend nicely across the polished top of the frets. It's funny, I think the guitar sounds slightly different, but it's hard to judge because of the fact it's obviously got brand new strings on it now, which it didn't have. But it seems to have a little bit more zing to it. I suppose there's more metal on metal contact with the frets contacting the string rather than my fingertips being on the wood to dull the sound slightly, possibly. But it's definitely got a little bit more zing to it, which might wear off as the strings bed in a bit, but I don't know. But on the whole, I'm pleased with it. I'm pleased that actually I could do it and it work and I haven't ruined the guitar. So the next thing I'll do, I'll play it for a bit and then I will just tidy the fret ends up. And that's it really. But yeah, good job, well done as far as I'm concerned. I mean, I wouldn't give it to a pro and say, what do you think of that? They're not going to think, wow, that's really good. But I've seen worse, or seen people that have paid for worse, so can't be bad. Anyway, we'll see you again soon in the Room of Rock with Ted and I.